order. First on the agenda, our Plan Commission meeting for December 18th, 2024 for the Village of Mount Pleasant. Roll call, please.
Washburn. Here. Rizzler.
Here.
Latia.
Here.
Driver.
Here. Next on the agenda is the approval of the November 20th, 2024 meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the November 2024 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
Second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, under old business, is Resolution 32, 2024, 8626 Giddings Road, Comprehensive Plan Amendment, CPA 24-2.
All right. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a continuation of the first reading on this resolution that you all have before you. This is to amend the transportation element of the comprehensive plan to remove the roads that are shown on the map in front of you. Those roads, when removed, will be replaced by the dedicated roads for the settlement at Hoods Creek Edition 5 preliminary subdivision plat. So what we're really doing is just changing around the comp plan so that it matches the actual roads that, you know, the Plan Commission recommended and the Village Board accepted as a part of that plat. We're trying to be a little bit bigger sticklers about the roads layer and get some of it cleaned up because some of it is showing its age over time. So this will both solve that platting issue. Then, like the one that we did out near the interstate, the village staff also added on some other cleanup items you can see on kind of the northeast portion of the map in front of you, where the actual platted roads did not match that proposed roads layer. So we're going to remove those because we've already accepted those roads and they're under construction. So the entire map should look like what was actually dedicated when it's all said and done. That'll clean up the roads layer. We are leaving the remainders on there that you can see on particularly the southeast portion of the property where the settlement subdivision did stub some future road extensions there. When we sent out the public notices, we had one or two people reach out just with questions about, you know, kind of what is this, and we explained to them, and no one really had any major issues with it that has reached out to us. The formal public hearing for this will take place in early January in front of the village board. But for time being, it's pretty short and sweet. I can answer any questions you have. This resolution would be the Plan Commission's formal adoption and recommendation of it. Just as a reminder, for these comp plan amendments, you all have formal approval denial authority. So this is an actual vote to approve the resolution.
All right. Any questions for Sam? Brown?
Sam, I could be wrong, and I don't have the map of the last Planning Commission meeting, but even in the last revision, you had this updating, you know, for the roads. So what has changed from the last?
Nothing has changed. It's just the process where we have to do a public notice. And so we sent out those public notices and now it's back in front of you.
Okay.
So the process to amend a comprehensive plan has like a 30-day kind of wait window in the middle. And that's the only reason why between October and now it's taken that long for it to come back. So.
Okay, I was just looking for what has changed, but thank you.
Yep.
Nancy?
Sam, one of the things I know we've talked about previously, when you look at your page here, the north-south road that's furthest west, is that 90th Street? Is that the extension of 90th Street? I think it is.
It is, yep, on the very west edge of the map.
So we're going to keep that in and still hope at some point somehow we get over there with another extension.
Yeah, that has to go, you know, there's a short extension of 90th Street north of Spring Street, but it kind of dead ends in that existing subdivision. So it'll actually have to go through there and then past Giddings and then continue north. At some point, we'll have to engineer a crossing to the Hoods Creek, which will be an interesting engineering exercise. So my expectation is that that extension of 90th Street is truly like a 2050 type of plan. We're really long term. But if you look at the settlement at Hoods Creek Ad 5 preliminary plat, they did include their short chunk in the northwest corner as well as a roadway connection to it. So we're still planning on it. It's just, you know, we're not going to make Jeff build that section anytime soon because it's like a weird 80-foot stretch of roadway to nowhere. So, yeah, maybe in 25 years we'll get there.
Yeah, based on current regulations, I don't know that you can today. I mean, it would be a very, very expensive road, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a
The
yeah.
natural resources are pretty compelling.
That's a collector-sized street and cross-section, you know, with the bike lanes and stuff. So it's not your standard local neighborhood road, and we tend to try to do those in big projects, particularly because also, you know, engineering that crossing to the Hoods Creek and the environmental corridor and everything will be a special process that we'll have to go through a DNR and, you know, everyone to get that all permitted correctly. There's probably some floodplain mitigation that we'll need to do as a part of that as well, because there's a lot of floodplain around the Hoods Creek. So, yeah, not a problem we'll have to deal with today, but we are keeping that in the long-term plans.
There you go.
So you'll update us in 2050 then on this, right?
Yeah, as I submit my retirement notice, I'll let you guys know. I hope you're still all here by then.
2050. Oh, Lord have mercy, okay.
I started working for Racine County in 1981, and that road was on the plans then.
So you're the holdup.
Yeah, could be.
Kept it on there, Frank, that's right.
It's been on there
90th
a
Street or,
Maybe north of
Plus.
Giddings, it'll be like Rissler Drive or something.
No, no thanks.
All right, any other questions for Sam?
I have none.
Then I'd be looking for a motion.
All right, so Chairman, I will make a motion to approve Resolution 32-2024 for 8626 Giddings Road Comprehensive Plan Amendment, CPA-24-2.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda, Robert Palm, 2024 Planning Report. All righty. I think we've got 2 minutes set aside. Okay,
We'll see if you can hold to that, Robin.
then moving up will be Sam doing the 2024 housing affordability analysis.
All right, so just as a reminder, every year we update our housing affordability analysis that's required by the state. We kind of typically go above and beyond the minimum required by the state to look at some of these affordability levels, as well as some housing statistics to really try to compare it against our comprehensive plan. The housing element is a mandated element as part of our long-term comprehensive plan. So we're reporting more on that stuff. The actual stuff in the state mandated report hasn't changed a whole lot year over year. It's just a huge list of parcels that are available for residential construction. And, you know, Mount Pleasant is a big place, so it's nigh unreadable, but we do it for the state. But this is the actual interesting stuff that we have. So, you know, we base this mostly off of census data and some HUD data. This is 2023, so we're always a year lagging because the census data that comes out, the 5-year estimates are for the year prior. So this is 23 data, but it's our 24 report. Here are some of the affordability levels. Those are defined by HUD as percent of area median income. And so you have, you know, 30, 50, 60, 80, 100% of area median income. So for a family of 4,
Sam, by area, is that just?
Racine County,
Okay.
that level is 91,400. That's kind of that sweet spot is 100% of AMI. The you know, items below that are then the tax credit levels. So keep that in mind as we go through. So multifamily tax subsidy limits, you know, if you're getting tax credits through the federal government for a housing project, that would be for a family of 4, the AMI limit for
Sam,
that.
So these numbers, if I want to understand, so 91,400 as 100%, is that the,
That is the Racine
ISO?
County area median income for a family of 4.
okay,
Median income.
median
Median.
income? Okay,
Yep. Yeah, and we do median, not
Sure.
average for most of these because high incomes and super low
Yeah,
incomes
yeah,
tend to
right,
throw
there's
it
a
off. So
rematch, yeah.
median is actually more accurate than average.
Okay.
And then this year, we added the 120% of AMI to kind of give a band, so that 73,100 between 80% and then $109,680 at 120%. That's kind of the most common band between 80 and 120 that people identify as workforce housing. So think, your average nurse, teacher, cop, those types of middle income jobs. So when people are talking about workforce housing, oftentimes they're talking about that 80 to 120 band. So what we do then, moving on, is we take that and look at both rent and utilities as well as housing costs. So on the renter side, you can see that for a family of 4 between 80 and 120, you have a rent of that's affordable for a family, including rent and utilities, between about $1,800 and about $2,700. Now, I think the note that we talk about a lot for this is Racine County actually has a pretty middle-of-the-road area median income, but a lot of people look at a rent, north of $2,000 a month, including utilities, for a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment and might say that's really high, but that's actually affordable. And so when you see a lot of these multifamily housing developers come in, it's because there's actually, we'll get into the amount of stock, but there's not enough supply, but there's actually a fair amount of room at the upper end of the market for people to afford more rent in Racine County than they're actually paying if they are a renter. What that does is put downward pressure on the market, so people who can't afford more rent are competing with people who can afford more rent. So housing is not filtering through in a way that frees it up for lower incomes oftentimes. And in Mount Pleasant specifically, a lot of our areas of the village don't score very well for tax credit type ones, either the competitive or non-competitive ones. So developers aren't bringing us a lot of tax credit, mandated affordable housing projects, because when they're competing against, the city of Racine or the city of Milwaukee, or increasingly the state is putting an emphasis on rural affordable housing and the north and west parts of the state. Us being in a suburban location, we just don't compete that well. So that is one of the reasons why allowing more higher end multifamily actually helps to free up units for people who are looking to rent and filter some housing through the market. On the ownership side, we then translate that into what would an affordable home look like for people making those incomes. And this is based on, roughly a little over 3 times what they make in a year for that area median income, and then it filters through of what their mortgage would look like and things like that. But so really, workforce housing in Racine County would be somewhere between more or less $245,000 and $368,000. So in that $250 to $370 range is what your average teacher would be looking to purchase in a house.
So this relates to purchase prices.
Correct.
Okay.
The disconnect, as you all well know, in your jobs and having friends and family in the housing market, is those homes basically don't exist on the new construction side. And due to the existing inventory being very tight, it's very hard for people to buy into the housing market. Compounded with that is a lot of people looking to downsize, as a lot of you probably know. And you're having a lot of people, and we say this every year, a lot of people in the baby boomer generation compete with millennials and now Gen Z as they can start to try to enter the housing market for this kind of 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath house that a lot of developers aren't building anymore. An interesting caveat to that in the last year is Bear's Pike River Crossing subdivision development sold a lot of their lots to D.R. Horton, which is a national home builder, and they work on a more volume basis than an individual home basis. So they're able to charge slightly more modest prices for their homes, but even those are looking like they'll be north of $400,000. So there are a bunch of ways to solve this, whether it's really a money issue, right? So you either try to squeeze more units out of the land that you have to reduce that individual lot cost. So that's why you have, as in Pike River Crossing, developers looking to do smaller lot, single-family or duplex residential, just because they can fit more units per, linear foot of street that they have to put in. The other way to solve it is on the money side and, incentivizing those developments through the village, helping underwrite them, which we also do. So, we're kind of trying to solve it on both ends. These are Mount Pleasant and Racine County specific numbers, but I don't think the problem is Racine County or Mount Pleasant specific. So this is an issue that everywhere is dealing with, and I think housing developers are starting to look at those products because it's one of the ways they can solve them. We get a lot of requests for incentives that, eventually we tried to weed out the real ones and bring them to the CDA and village board. But these are the kind of factors driving that is, a lot of people can't afford a home north of $400,000. And how do we try to bring that back to the marketplace to get people into those homes? What we also do is pull some census data on costs. So you can see here raw unit counts, selected monthly owner costs. So there are about just over 6,000 homes in Mount Pleasant where people have a mortgage on them. And you can see generally what their monthly costs are. So that middle band there between really $1,000 and $2,500 makes up the vast majority of it. Once you get north of $2,500, it starts to drop off, and anyone paying less than $1,000 on their mortgage should be very happy with themselves. The median mortgage payment in Mount Pleasant is $1,773. I think a lot of that is buoyed by people who entered the housing market under times with low interest rates. So it'll be interest, we'll track this number over time. My hunch is that number will start to creep up both as the cost of housing has increased over time, but as interest rates over the last couple of years have gone up tremendously and you have people still buying and selling. So as more of those higher interest loans start to impact buyers, I would expect that number to rise. Then we also look at the selected monthly owner costs as a percentage of household income. You can see generally under 30% is considered healthy. People who are paying more than 30% of their household income on housing are considered, stressed. Sometimes that number is 35%, but generally it's in that band. So notably, 18% of people are housing stressed on the owner-occupied side. This would typically people you'd call like house rich, but cash poor type of people. But the vast majority, almost 2/3 of Mount Pleasant, pays less than 25%. So on the owner-occupied side, Mount Pleasant is doing pretty well. If you own a house, you're probably a low percentage of your income, 25% or less, is going to your housing costs.
I think that's an amazing statistic, actually.
Yeah,
I
and
think that-
we'll contrast that in a second with the renter side. I think that brings into some interesting highlights there. But I agree, it's a good statistic, and it shows long-term.
Healthy community, financially healthy community. People can afford their homes and easily, based on the 30% rule being the high end, and they can afford to keep them up, and they can afford to renovate them and afford to maintain them with that extra. So that's really a wonderful statistic.
And that'll play out on some of the vacancy rates we'll get to in a second as well. But moving on to renter costs, we have just under 2,400 units which are renter occupied in the village. Here you can see the vast majority are paying less than $1,500 a month in rent. So again, and the median is just over $1,000. So contrasting that with the affordable amount here, which is north of $1,800, again goes to show that people in Mount Pleasant can actually afford to pay a lot more rent without being housing stressed. And so that's why we continue to see some of these multifamily developers interested in Mount Pleasant, is we have a that imbalance in the market provides them some opportunity to put in successful projects. An example of that, and I know we brought it up before, is the fiduciary project that went in on Braun and 31, basically leased as quickly as they got certificates of occupancy for those buildings. So they stabilized their entire project. More than 95% of the units were leased by the time they had their final certificate of occupancy. So day one, they were basically fully rented.
And it's your sense that the savvy developers do exactly this kind of analysis in deciding where they want to go?
They actually typically pay housing analysts to do even more in-depth things, analyses for their projects, particularly investor-led firms, almost more often than not require types of in-depth analyses before they'll pull the trigger on a project. But again, a fiduciary multifamily project costs north of $50 million to build. So between equity, investors, and banking costs, they do their homework before they do it. And, these are a window into some of the numbers they're likely looking at. On the gross rent as a percentage of household income, here you see it a little bit more evened out than on the homeowner side. So still, a majority of the village is under that 30%, but notably 25% of the village is over 30%. So the renters on the village in general tend to be a little bit more housing stressed than the owners. And again, I think that goes to show and backs up that idea that there are people who could be paying more rent are competing with people who can't afford to pay more rent. So if you're a renter, you're income limited, and you're looking for new units coming online in the village or existing units, it's tough out there. That brings us to kind of the final part of our housing analysis, which goes to look at the total village and some occupancy rates. Here we have just over 12,000 housing units, and these are using ACS 5-year estimates. So I take all of these as with a little bit of a grain of salt. They're most valuable in context in terms of long-term trends. So it's not that there's exactly 12,061 housing units. It's based off a 5-year estimate of survey data. So over time, we can look at trends in housing data, but I think there are some individual items that are interesting here. We have just over 9,000 housing units that are owner-occupied and just under 3,000 housing units that are renter-occupied. On the owner-occupied side, we have a vacancy rate of 1.4%, and on the renter-occupied side, we have a vacancy rate of 1.6%. We typically use about 2%, somewhere between 2 and 4. We're conservative, so we use 2 as a healthy vacancy rate on the owner-occupied side, meaning you want about 2% of units to be vacant so people can filter through, buy homes, sell homes, that type of thing. Our chair knows that having some units on the market is helpful for everyone, looking and selling. So 2% is what we use there on the owner side. And then on the renter side, we typically have a higher benchmark. We use 8% as a healthy vacancy rate. Really, it's somewhere between 5 and 8%, but again, we go up to 8% there. And the reason for that is typically people filter through renter-occupied units a little bit more rapidly than owner-occupied side. This doesn't get into different lease lengths and things like that, year, 2 year, 6 month, month to month, et cetera. But you want a slightly higher percentage of your renter units to be vacant at any given point to provide that flexibility in the housing market for people who are looking to rent. Then finally, we compare it against our comprehensive planning goals, which I didn't put the number in here, but using sewer pack estimates show the village at having just under 20,000 total housing units by 2050, and about 44,000 people. So, projecting, sewer pack is projecting that the village will grow a pretty significant amount in the next 25 years. So to get to those numbers, right now, we are 4,141 owner-occupied units short and 3,398 renter-occupied units short. So what that means is between this year and 2050, we would need to build almost 160 homes and 130 renter-occupied units per year, every year, to reach that. Where that really comes to play is looking at historic data So since 2010, we have only built enough owner-occupied housing units in 2 of those years, in the last 14 years, and renter-occupied housing units in 4 of the last 14 years, which means we are 2,134 owner-occupied units and 871 renter-occupied units behind where we should be this year. So we are housing stressed. This goes to show this is how housing stressed we are. It's a tight marketplace as it is. We're under healthy vacancy rates, so it's not like, there's all these units on the market and we've underbuilt for the last 14 years. Robin has, data that goes back even further, and that is pretty consistent until you get to probably the early 2000s was the last time we were adding any amount of significant supply to the owner-occupied housing market. So 2008 was rough. It continues to be rough, and it's just cumulative every year. We're more and more behind of where we should be. I wouldn't worry about it as much as if we were over those healthy vacancy rates, but us being under and, behind means that it's almost a double whammy in the village of it. People are pretty housing stressed. On the owner-occupied side, for people who have homes, those people tend to be in pretty good shape. But for people who are looking to rent or people who are looking to enter the housing market, that is where a lot of the housing stress comes in. And it's really that 250 to 370 range that I think is where we should be generally targeting to as a aspirational goal. And then finally, just as a note for you all, when I say units needed by 2050, we use, in terms of the breakdown between owner-occupied side and renter-occupied side, we use the Wisconsin average homeowner rate with census data, which is just over 2/3, 1/3. So in Wisconsin, about 68% of people own a house in communities, and the rest rent homes. So we use that as kind of our guide and change it year over year to make sure that Mount Pleasant right now is almost 80% owner-occupied, which on its face sounds good, right? People who own their units tend to invest in them more, build wealth, all of those things. But it also means that people who are looking to stay flexible on the renter side, particularly for employers, attract new people to the region. With the lack of units, that's where renter-occupied housing, I think, is really important, and we're lacking in that as well. So. And I think if you talk to any employer, as you probably all have, it's tough to find people, and it's tough to relocate people to Racine County, particularly on a short-term basis before they're looking to buy into the market. A lot of those places are full. So that's why those places have been renting up, and why you see more and more employers or groups like RCEDC in the county focusing on it at higher levels too. So yeah, that is the long and short of our housing report. It's a mixture of good, bad, and interesting, but I can answer any questions that you all have regarding it.
I've got a question on big picture demographics. Since you're projecting out to 2050, a lot of these owner-occupied are still occupied by baby boomers. That's a major transition that's happening and will continue to happen for the next, say, 20 years.
Yep.
A lot of houses are going to come up
Mm-hmm.
and be available. Do these projections, do they try to factor that in? Because that's huge.
Yeah, our sewer pack does try to take into account changing demographics and age groups over time. What does get hard to, long-term demographics does try to take into account the age that people are having children and things like that, but
And smaller families.
those trends do change over time, and smaller families too. So it's an important point, and another reason why a lot of areas, not just Mount Pleasant, are housing stressed is because even though we might not be growing as quickly as we did in the 60s when people had huge families and then those families left and bought a bunch of homes, there are fewer people per home, and so you need more housing units to maintain the same populations. If you look at longstanding older communities, oftentimes they're as much as 20% less than they were, even though they're fully occupied. Some of the inner ring Milwaukee suburbs that have been more or less fully occupied for the last 100 years, your Shorewoods or your Wauwatosas or those places where you have long-standing data in those older communities. Those communities are oftentimes 20% fewer people, even though they've been at 100% occupancy for the last 50, 100 years. So it's tough, in those areas. We have room to grow, some places don't, so that's why we put a lot of emphasis on making sure we're solving short-term problems, but also thinking about long-term problems at the same time.
Interesting. This past summer, I was asked to join the Racine Habitat Board of Directors. And when you go back to some of your other previous income scales or income slides, I find it very interesting now. We've sort of changed some dynamics. In other words, what I hear in your presentation, you're calling workforce housing, we used to call affordable housing. And now that lower income is lower income housing as opposed to what we used to refer to as workforce housing. I was speaking with one of my clients the other day, and we were talking about building permits. Racine County-wide last year, year-to-date, there were only 138 permits pulled. Countywide, down 38%, while the state is up 12% in terms of building permits being pulled. And I think that I think that it's a very interesting curmudgeon that we're in, to be able to get the developers to pay the price that it's costing them for land and the infrastructure, even though we're creating TIFs that have housing units in them, to still see the high prices that still forces. And so I see Habitat, you know, we have a couple of properties we're looking at or that have been donated to them that are going to allow them to actually build a neighborhood of houses, like 11 houses to group together. And their most recent house in the city of Racine that in years past has appraised at like, you know, 180, 185. The appraisal came in at 270 for a Habitat house. Now, because of their formula working with the clients, that works out so that the client is not looking at paying a mortgage based on that higher price. But it still just goes to show you how tough it is to find those opportunities, and where, you know, I've said to some of the developers that I know, you know, next time you come in with a big subdivision, I want to see Habitat Street. You know, how do you get them to help an organization like Habitat who can build that workforce housing or low-income housing? It really is something, and I find these statistics really fascinating at this point.
Yeah, and I think some of that flexibility, I think that's a good point, bringing up Habitat as a developer. They do a pretty good job of value engineering the homes that they do give to people, but some of our developers have not done as good of a job as they could in terms of value engineering it. So if you attended the Racine County housing presentation, or if you go back and watch it or read some of the reports, Tracy Cross, who did some of the analysis for the county late this year, also emphasized that some developers need to more efficiently design their homes, reduce corners, keep it, to more of a square box and things like that, just to reduce costs, where you're not buying as much soffit, or you don't have to custom build some of this stuff. You can make very good looking homes and oftentimes use higher quality materials just by reducing or simplifying some of the architecture, particularly that architecture that doesn't serve any purpose other than just kind of base aesthetic purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of developers have heard that, and you'll start seeing homes that look closer to what was honestly built in, pre and post-war US, where, a lot of your, pre-war homes in the 20s and 30s where, people were tight on cash, those were oftentimes pretty value engineered. And then post-war, as those suburbs grew, again, you look at, neighborhoods from the 50s, those are not extravagant homes. They're oftentimes 1,000 square feet, couple bedrooms, and a box or a rectangle. And that's how people build wealth and are able to move up and down the housing ladder. So I think developers will start putting a focus on that, but that's on them to take that ball. We can provide all the flexibilities in the world in our zoning code, but they have to make it happen too. So this is an everyone problem. It's not just a Mount Pleasant or a Racine County problem on the government side. It's a financing, it's a banking problem, it's a developer problem, it's a government problem. So that's why so many of the solutions that come in have facets of everyone working together. But getting housing built these days is pretty complicated.
Sam, if I could ask one other question. Earlier in your remarks, you talk about how in some instances the village is offering incentives or subsidizing in some fashion these housing developments. What sort of concessions, I mean, tit for tat, what are we getting out of these subsidies and these incentives? What are you getting these developers to do in terms of building housing types or mixes that we prefer seeing?
Yeah, in our tax increment districts, we try to solve that in a couple different ways. The short answer is they build units, which we need. We have housing developers come in and say they're used to dealing with very prescriptive communities and ask us, what do you want to see on this site? And we say, number one, supply. We want to see you put in housing units because that is the thing we need over anything else is just more units in the marketplace. But then moving on, for those projects that do get incentives, we try to include things of public benefit. So if you look out at TID 7, we captured a public park site in that. We got some local roads connected through. Carrington Boulevard is a collector street we'll eventually connect through and provide traffic circulation. That's a bigger facility that we wouldn't expect a local developer to be able to take the full cost on for, so they get oftentimes credited for some of that construction. So it's things of public benefit. And they change per neighborhood and per area, parks or roads or sewers or whatever. But yeah, in those projects where we are incentivizing, we try to go above and beyond to find things that benefit the public in that area where they're improving the built environment, not just for their site, but around them as well.
So one other question, and then I'll stop. I mean, we talk about we need all this housing, we need all this housing. Who do we need it for? I mean, just assume for the sake of discussion, nobody in Mount Pleasant is homeless tonight. Okay, so we have to keep building all these units every year for whom? So people can move from Illinois into Mount Pleasant? Or, because I don't see, again, with baby boomers not being a growth factor anymore, demographics within the village itself not triggering, we're not self-generating that kind of growth out of our population or resident pool. So who are the people that we're worrying about providing housing for, if I make any sense with that?
People who are looking to move to the community is number one, but also people inside the community who right now, perhaps don't have the ability to build wealth through home ownership. I think is another big one that I personally worry about. I have plenty of friends who have just given up on owning a home straight up because they have good jobs and they make a lot of money, but also they don't want to live in the crappiest apartment to save up for a down payment. Once you're in your 30s, you kind of don't want to live in that post-college apartment anymore, right? It's kind of a bummer. And so they're in this trap of you have to pay enough to find a decent place and rent is not cheap. The income has not risen at the same rate as some of the increases to rent and housing costs. But they never have enough money to save up for a true down payment, which is getting more and more out of reach as housing costs and interest rates go up over time too. So then there's kind of trap to the point where, yeah, I think a lot of people my age have just kind of like shrug and say, is what it is. I guess I'm a renter unless 2008 happens again and housing prices go down 30% or interest rates go back down to sub 3%. How do I afford a home while still having a nice place to live in the meantime? There are smaller families, so you have a lot of single parents or single person households that would like to build wealth through ownership. Oftentimes those people went into places like condos that basically don't get built anymore. Your 2-bedroom condo almost doesn't exist because they're almost impossible to finance on the developer side. And that's not a problem we can solve. That's a banking developer problem, but it does affect the marketplace. So people who are income limited in that way or have other obligations like children or family obligations are unable to enter the owner occupied side of the housing market. So for me, that's a lot of people who I worry about. And then finally, the employment side. We have a lot of employment growth, and that is outpacing some of our housing growth. So if we want those people to live in Mount Pleasant, to fill up RUSD and try to reinvest in some of the public services that we have here, they should probably live east of the I, if not Mount Pleasant. And we don't have the renter side or the owner side to attract those people to live here in the long term. Some of those people are people you want to live in your community, high-paying jobs. You know, some of the people who work at some of the new Microsoft data centers will be making north of 6 figures. They can, you know, afford a lot. We'd like those people to live and invest in our schools and our community. Where do they go if we're at sub 2% vacancy rates? You know, so that's, in my eyes, at least in the next 5 years, who we're building for is a mixture of people trying to enter the housing market, whether they're moving here, they have a job here, or, you know, their family situation, they're ready, except for not being able to find the right unit.
Can I do one chime in to connect, Tom, your earlier question about what to do when baby boomers move out? A big portion is that when they want to move out, where do they move out to? So a big thing is downsizers. People that have a big house right now can't take care of it and want to downsize. Well, they're not going to downsize to a college apartment. They're going to downsize to something nice, and you know they don't need to own another home because they don't have a 30-year plan. You know, it's a little bit less than that. So that's downsizing is a significant portion of the market, and the developers have told that to us.
I think that's why you see multiple developers, and the village board has approved some and you know, not approved others, but we have a lot of developers coming in looking at rent, like single-family rentals or small cottage-style rentals and cottage courts or other types of situations similar to what Habitat is looking at building, but on the renter side, just because, you know, a lot of people who are downsizing will pay rent if they're only here for 6 months and then they go to Arizona or Florida. So those types of units really appeal to people. I wouldn't be surprised to see more and more developers dip their toes in that renter, you know, kind of market for, it looks more similar to owner-occupied housing, but is renter-occupied. And then we'll see if condos ever come back. You know, there's some developers who are trying to make it work, who have good banking connections, who are finding some success, doing small infill projects locally and, you know, in southeast Wisconsin. But they're still really hard to finance. From what I've heard from most developers, you have to pre-sell, you know, in each block of units, probably at least 50% of the units for them to give you the financing on it. So even if you have a fourplex, that, you know, Mount Pleasant has plenty of those 4-unit condo buildings. You have to sell 2 of those units before you even can pull a building permit. It's pretty tough for people to buy into that. So I hope that we'll see more condo. I think condos are a big solution to a lot of these issues. On the land use side, on you know, the different types of unit side, but we'll see if it can happen. So
This could be a conversation that could go on for days.
yeah, I
my
want to be
brain
careful.
right
We have 2
now-
more reports here, and Robin and George have been
I
patient.
thought we'd be out of
so-
here by 1:30. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, hell
yeah.
no. But you know what? It's such a fascinating, to me anyway, it is a fascinating conversation. And Tom, to your point about who wants to live here, what it reminds me of is several things. Number one, the night that we announced the Microsoft project here at the village board, when President DeGroot mentioned or announced that, the first person that got up to the microphone was a woman who lives here in town, was here on another item that was on the agenda, and she got up and spoke and said, I've completely forgotten why I was here. I am so excited. Now maybe I can get my kids back. My 2 sons have had to go out of state to find the kind of work in their IT field that pays what they, you know, that pays a high wage. And so I think there's a huge undercurrent. My kids all had to go west. They couldn't afford to stay in the community. They live west of the I. I would love to see them back here and love to see something built that they would be able to afford and enjoy. So I think it's really an interesting curmudgeon that we have right now in trying to, you know, and then I had a Christmas lunch with a couple that are friends of mine here in the village. They go to Florida now. They have for the last 3 years. They've gone down as snowbirds. And they live in a huge house, and they have no kids, and they're filling it up with all their collections. And I said, well, you know, then they were talking about how they don't need all that house anymore, and I said, well, you know, it's a good market, why don't you sell it? And the thing, we all looked at each other, and I said, where would you go? And they were just deer in headlights. They don't wanna leave Mount Pleasant. It's easier for them to stay in that big house and pay the utilities, which they can afford and so forth, and keep it up, than it is for them to move, because they would like to stay in the community. And, I told them about a nice condo project that might be starting, a 2-unit condo project they might be interested in, but still, there's still a lack of it out there. And the ones that are occupied and built, nobody's moving.
Yeah, it's tough.
So anyway, that's,
Well, to put a bow on it, we do this in a written report as well, which I'll forward to the commission, the village board. We post on our village website, so that'll be done in the next few weeks. I'll let you all know when it is, so you can go take a look at the written report, but a lot of these statistics you'll find in it.
interesting, very interesting.
Thank you, Sam. All right, Robin.
So, here's the planning 2024 report. It was a year that existed. So, you know, that's that.
I think.
Okay, that text came out smaller than I wanted it to. Story of my life. So this is basically the counts of the permits that we've taken in, from zoning variances, request letters, zoning map amendments. By far the biggest one, certificates of occupancy. Pretty much each one of those is paired with a building permit. And just a few, you know, final plats and stuff like that. I think not too much that's interesting as far as overall volume. I would say, you know, sign permits have gone down a little bit. My oldness is catching up to me because I'm like, I want to see that. What can I do? Okay, let's move on. So this is the planning revenue from our permits without site plans, and you'll see why in just a second. Basically that we got the sign permits went down quite a bit. I think that was largely a fact of the reconfiguring of how sign permit costs work. In order to kind of comply with OpenGov, the easiest thing is just to do a per square foot calculation, which means that some sign permits could be extremely cheap. And the old one, like the minimum for 0 to 32 is $100. This one, they're a little bit cheaper than that, which is usually good because, you know, the small signs are usually for the little guy. But in the grand scheme of things, sign permits is not the major source of where we get revenue from. And this explains why. So that is all of our revenue, and then this time added in the revenue for site plan review. That's a outlier. Well, I don't know. Can we even call this kind of thing an outlier anymore? When it's been like 4 out of the 7 years that Sam and I have been together, we've had really, really big things getting approved and getting really large income as a result of it. Not income, it's you know, revenue, permits, stuff like that. So that is that. For the most part, this has been driven by 3 site plan reviews. The 2 from Microsoft, and there's another one. One of the housing ones, I think.
Probably Bear Development,
Yeah.
Pike River.
So this one is basically the location of where our sign permits are coming from. Eventually, I think with the new software, it'll be able to automate this for me. But basically, you know, it's not obviously map located, but it's within the sector. I don't know if you guys know this, but every square mile is divided into 36 sectors. And is it square mile or square I don't know, but it's called a section. And so these are each identified as where it is. If you can actually look, if you ever want to look at, break out the parcel number, there is a particular portion of the parcel number that corresponds to all these on the map, which is kind of cool. So not a huge bunch of surprises here. You have a lot of signed permits out by the interstate, a lot of signed permits at 20 in Green Bay, and a lot at Durand and Green Bay. Again, surprising no one, but it's kind of cool just to confirm your priors. Going back to revenue, this is our revenue over the past 6 years. You'll see that, 2018, 2019, 100,000, 2020, a dip to 57, 2021, always kind of around 100,000. And then we budgeted only 60,000 for this year, but got 274. So
Keep up the good work.
yeah, well, I mean, almost like as a result, and the trustees sure know this, but we had a position for a zoning code enforcement officer approved. Thank you so much from the
Can't
bottom
get
of
you
my
out of
heart.
that.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much.
Robin,
Just-
I have one quick question on this graph.
Yeah.
What percentage of the revenue is because of the growth and not because of the rate increase?
The revenue, so basically our permit revenue, I think there was a small rate jump.
We didn't change the rate this year, Robin.
No, not this year. So it's been 4 cents a square foot for a couple years, and then it was 3 before that. We went to a pure square foot calculation, just like with sign permits, because that's easier with OpenGov. But the jump is because of Microsoft. Just the square footage throws everything off.
Okay.
I think one check was 88 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a big check. Yep. So next one, so we're switching over from our permits. A couple of things is, this will go into the thank you for the code enforcement officer, but as far as permits go, we're gonna switch over our permitting system software and starting in January to March. That'll be fun. But we just got, it's just so we have more departments under the same umbrella. So look forward to working with that. So here's basically a breakdown of all of the municipal complaints as a umbrella. Both me and Lisa and I kind of oversee municipal complaints as a whole, and then Lisa shuffles them off to where they need to go. So by far the most go to DPW, and by far 80% of those are grass, lawn, weed complaints. Also snow. So that is 80 to 90% of those. Nuisance and zoning are both of the ones that I primarily deal with, and I will kind of go into those as a specific. Most of the time with building, I didn't track any of that they issued on their own. These are building violations that I write for the most part, that kind of go hand in hand with a zoning violation. If it's a building is blighted and it's falling, literally falling apart, I will include a dilapidated building right up and just kind of run it by them, and as a part of that. So also the way this chart breaks down is that most of the zoning ones are paired with nuisance ones. So I think there's only about 20 or 40 zoning complaints that don't have a corresponding public nuisance complaint. So these are open and close rates. So basically, this is just for zoning and public nuisance. The total bar is how many that are opened in that year. The green are the ones that are closed, and the yellow are the ones that are active or not resolved. That seems like a lot, but these things take a while. I still have stuff that is open and that is being either litigated or being transferred over to the attorney's office. You know, these things can take years if it bounces back and forth. Some of these are ones that just didn't get updated because they were opened and then the problem resolved itself or what on. But those are kind of the overviews. So we have about 30 that are open right now, just in various forms. So this is the map, and this is hard to read, so I actually have a couple slides that zoom in a bit. So that kind of gives us some ideas of where the zoning complaints are happening. But I can't, like, putting on a map was helpful, but I didn't really get a whole lot of, like, data. It's mostly correlated to where people live, for the most part. Just to kind of, as a key, the green is a complaint in 2023, a green number. A pink number is a complaint in 2024. If you kind of want to know for just for location's sake, in 2305, which is all the way over thing, that's the only thing there is Eaton Lane. That's the only Mount Pleasant area there. And then we're gonna pan south a little bit. And I believe the complaints in section 29, correct me if I'm wrong, any kind of Microsoft noise complaint would have gone in there. So by far that is the biggest amount in one section, except for probably like 25 where a lot of folks live. Because of the software and whatnot, and I didn't break it down by the types of violations, but it's been pretty consistent as far as most of the time getting blight, falling fences, stuff like that, junk cars, et cetera, et cetera. Not a huge lot, difference between this or that. I do just in general, my time working here, it's been kind of a interesting shift on how little people want to actually converse with their neighbor about their problem before coming to the government. You hear a lot that people want government out of their lives until, it's a choice of, do I want to deal with the government or talk to my neighbor? And you're like, well, I'm gonna call Robin. And most of the time, a lot of these kind of neighbor complaints, I will try to help mediate as much as possible, but it's mostly a civil matter, so that's neither here nor there. And that is about it as far as our year-end report. Any questions?
At least we have, as much as, as it was a very nice report and it's very detailed, but the good news is it appears that most of our infractions are not horrible and they're very innocuous and just kind of typical civil complaints between neighbors and the typical people that leave their unregistered cars, and it really is pretty mundane. So that,
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that comes up with the fact that we are like sort of an urban-rural straddle community, because like our rules have to accommodate both types of development or non-development. And when somebody that lives closer to the city is saying, hey, these people are parking cars on their lawn, and I'm like, well, if you go out in the country, that's the only place you can park your car is on your lawn. So it's hard for us necessarily to have rules that sort of satisfy both, but we are moving forward in that. I think with the code enforcement officer, I'm really excited that we will kind of go from what is now a complaint-based system, meaning like we only the squeaky wheels get the grease, to a more proactive approach, which is a bit more fair and even-handed as far as scouting out a particular section and issuing violations as they are seen by the official. We're also going to be working with PD because we hope that zoning code enforcement officer will be a liaison between us and PD, so that they can kind of identify these things when they're driving around. Because, I mean, between our DPW drivers, PD, and garbage truck people, they know all the zoning violations before anybody else does. So that would be, that's something that we look forward to. And of course, it would also lead in a marked drastic increase in citations. I'm very hesitant to issue citations at all, because as I've told you, going into the court, it doesn't necessarily speed up the process, it actually lengthens it. Ultimately, you have to rely on that property owner to clean up their property. So,
When there's fines levied for nuisance calls like this, where does that revenue go? Does that go to the planning department, or does it go to a village general fund?
general fund, yeah. So it's not like it comes back to us or anything like that. I've been accused of that, you know, and that I am issuing fines and citations because I want to line my pockets. I insisted that I did not get paid 1 penny more, and I would rather not issue them and not have to deal with them yelling at me.
Robin, given this substantial bump in revenue, I assume there'll be a matching bump in the stipend paid to the Plan Commission to bring us up to minimum wage?
I think I did see that line item, yes.
Yeah, I would kind of hope that's in the works somewhere.
Don't talk to me.
Come on, Sam.
That's a village board decision, I believe.
Do we know
Well-
anybody on the village board?
Yeah, I think,
Well, our village board's one of the lowest paid boards in the area too, and we've got one of the busiest villages, so, you know, it's a very interesting curmudgeon, Tom, you know.
It's always a thing
Never
where
an easy one to bring up to the taxpayer, let's
No.
put it that way.
No, it is.
But and especially because of how few of them wanna actually sit up here, so, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, anyway.
I've constantly known that as, you know, as a professional in public service, people are like, you should run for something. And I was like, I don't want the hassle or the downgrade. Like, you know, I like the consistency. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to George.
All right, thank you. Robin?
I was just hoping maybe to tap in some Christmas spirit or cheer here from you, but apparently it didn't happen.
Oh, me?
Yeah, just in terms of,
I had a Christmas light complaint in July. That was fun.
You want Robin to carol or something?
no, I just wanted the increase in the stipend.
All right. Thank you. We presented back in the summer, so this is just a little bit more comprehensive stuff. We've really touched base on just participation numbers. This also will show you revenue and a few other things that took place this last year. So this is just a general overview about what we do. This is what goes into the budget annually to kind of tell the public what our divisions are all about. So first thing we'll start with is our recreation programming, which again, a lot of these numbers you had seen previously, but just wanted to kind of highlight them again as we saw a significant increase in our playgrounds program, which is like our summer camps, they're half-day summer camps. We did see an increase overall in our softball program, but then a little downswing in t-ball. So, you know, some things are fluid. So the increase in softball is nice because you know that the large numbers that you had from t-ball continued to stay with our program moving in. So that's why you see that increase. And it was nice to see our other programming that takes place over at Stuart McBride, the sand volleyball and kickball. You know, sand volleyball stayed almost the same, and then, you know, we came close to doubling our participation for kickball. So, you know, it's showing that we're not, just because we have a new fancy toy over at Campus Park doesn't mean we still stop our programming at the other parks. It's really nice to see that those programs are still being successful. So this is more the, oh, did that slide not go? Here we go. All right, so this breaks down our overall revenue by each of the respective programs. So what you'll see is that, you know, obviously with the increase in participation, we saw a significant increase in the revenue for playgrounds, for softball, for kickball, and then minor drops in the other two programs. Our sponsors and donations all pretty much remain even on a yearly basis. Each time we'll get a new sponsor here, but then another one will drop, and so they just cancel each other out a lot of these times, and you only have so many teams when you have the same relative numbers too, so then you don't have the opportunity to throw a second sponsor or there, and then you only have so much space for your banners, so then you can only do so much. And so, yeah, we found some interesting things too about like when other parts of the village apply for grants with different companies, then you may be excluded from getting one for your department. So now we've learned about the communication and how with the filing, and so that might help us going into 2025. So yeah, kind of a learning process. But overall, we're very happy with the continued increase in participation, and then also the continued increase in revenue.
George,
Yep.
Where do you have the sand volleyball? Which park?
Stuart McBride. So as you, closer to where the old town hall was,
Okay.
there's one softball diamond over there. It's just right behind Pick and Save.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So just some years in photo, like small ones, just to kind of, you know, catch a glimpse of what the people were participating out there. You can see we participated in the expo. Brittany was taking photos, but she was there with her staff, kind of showcasing our programs. This was in conjunction with the county and several other agencies back in February. We got some pictures out at the new park. You can see the chaos that ensues with T-ball, with the third picture from the right at the top in the middle there. You know, our staff getting down and dirty in the top right with a craft project. So, you know, it's nice to see, and there's a lot of representation of the different parks and different areas that we take photos on. So we try to encapsulate that throughout the year. So here's just takes us some of the larger special events that we did. 3 of those are run out of our department, and then we work in conjunction with the PD for National Night Out, providing staff support, helping them with the locations, access to where they need to get water and different things at campus, and supplies down at Polzine Park. So I also wanted to highlight just how we work in tandem with other departments. You know, the graphics that you see here on the bottom for trunk or treat and for the tree lighting were all done by the communications department. So we work with them to help get the word out, putting out great graphics for us, so that draw attention to the people to get them more engaged and, you know, wanting to come to our events. So it's nice to have the support from all the other departments. So here's a breakdown of our park permit revenues. The picnic permits, the total that you see there, that includes Smolenski, Stuart McBride, Drozd, and Campus. That total does not include our reservations at the Parks and Rec building. We saw a significant increase there. That number of 76 does not include the weekly card group that is also there. So when you factor that in, because I did look back and we had, I think, 44 or 45 times where they were the only people at the building that day. It means our building was being occupied by somebody other than staff a third of the year. So we're continuing to increase the usage of that building from the outside public. And then it also doesn't include the internal use, like when we had the board out there for strategic planning and different things. So, you know, the building is continuing to be used and continuing to increase. And so we're, again, very happy with the way that those numbers have went up. When you see the full opening of Campus Park, there's only a certain number of how many people are renting picnics every single year. You see a huge jump there. You're bound to see a little drop. So we saw a little bit of drop on some of our other sites like Drozd and Stuart McBride. But again, we have the big bump. And that numbers for campus is a little bit skewed because it was only open partially last year. So, but, you know, we're happy for year one to a full of summer to have, you know, 24 days where the pond shelter out there was being utilized. So that number also does not include some of our special events that were out there, like United Way, Relay for Life, the concert series. So any sort of revenue that came from picnic permits, parks building, and then those miscellaneous reservations, those all get lumped into one single line item. And I just, for the presentation purposes, just called it picnic permits. But you can see we saw a significant bump as well for this year. So you can see Relay for Life picture. The picture of our parks building was a wedding that took place there. And so we had 3 weddings, I think. So I think there was voting happening once, so they moved over to here, and they were super happy. They came and they're like, oh, we can come decorate and do that. So maybe that's a trend that they'll try to do. Instead of getting married here, maybe they'll choose to get married over at our building. So yeah, it was really nice. So
You know, it's hard to find a small space like that.
yeah,
You
Yep.
know, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
yeah,
Most of them are 300 people, but if you just want 50 people,
correct.
it's hard to find that space.
Maybe
Yeah,
we should add
significant-
wedding planning to your
What's
to your
that?
job description.
Oh.
Wedding planner?
I mean, yeah, I did work for a party company in college, so, you know, I
Oh.
tables and chairs, so I got a little bit of that background. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of, it's funny that you joke like that, but we are kind of a catch-all with that type of stuff. When people do call us, we do try to cater to what they need as far as their reservations are concerned. If it doesn't fit them to be outdoors, but indoor might work. And that did happen. Somebody wanted to do an outdoor wedding in their backyard, and they realized, oh, that's not going to work. So then they come to us and say, what can we do? What can't we do? So yeah, got a little bit of, I guess I can put it a line on my resume, but I don't plan on going anywhere. So hopefully don't need to use that. Some additional highlights. Again, we talked about the completed Smolinski Park restoration. We were just notified, actually a press release went out on Friday, that we are a grant recipient from the DNR for urban forestry grant for next year. We were submitted an application for the full amount of $25,000, and we were granted. So what does that mean? Well, we now can use that money to do a number of different items. Part of the application we submitted was that we want to do a full tree inventory for the village, for village-owned land, streets, staff training, developing a comprehensive plan and management for the trees throughout the village. So we're pretty excited about that. That can get kick-started here starting January 1. But yeah, I've known for about a month, but we couldn't say anything until Friday, so this seemed like a perfect opportunity to share the good news. For those who might not be aware, we had a UW-Madison student. He selected our project as his senior capstone project. So this was back in, I think, early last year, where we first met with a couple of professors from UW, talked about the Bikes Ramke property, the 75 acres on KR, and talked about the potential to have them come in and master plan for that park. They thought it would be a very good project, so we submitted that. The students get to choose. I think there was 11 projects out of 30 or so that were chosen for this year. So basically we get to give the student an experience of what it's like to master plan a park, come up with full design. Whether we utilize it going forward, I'm sure it will be a tool. It's probably not anything we're going to go through and implement, but it's certainly a great program, and feel pretty great to be selected. We did our park ordinance update, and then I was recently approved to join the Wisconsin Park and Rec Association's Professional Development Committee as a pre-chair for that. So it's a 3-year term. A former colleague from Illinois who works in Wisconsin reached out to me to gauge my interest, and after doing some investigation, I thought it would not only benefit me, but the village just by getting involved, because again, we have such a small department, being more exposed to what else is going around the state. And then the village supports our professional development here, so it kind of a win-win for everybody. So that will begin also in 2025 coming up here, so.
Excellent. Good.
And yeah, that's all that I have, so.
All right, George, great
Questions?
job. Great job.
Thank you.
Can I ask George one question?
Absolutely. Just
George,
one.
just one. To the extent you can, and this might be hard, but how would you say Mount Pleasant's overall parks and recreation programs, facilities, amenities compare to similar communities?
So, it's very interesting because the way, you have to find comparable sample sizes, right? And that's the difficult. So I worked in a community in Illinois that was 33,000, but it was a park district. Had separate taxing districts. They were bringing in $6 million annually from property taxes for their parks. So when you have that amount of revenue or, you know, money to play with for that, you can do a significant amount of different things. So you're working from the same budget. You know, the aquatic center that I ran there was the same amount as my annual budget here. So you're working with constraints of starting from not having any full-time staff, part-time staff, public works, managing everything to get us there. So it's just kind of baby steps to get us to where we need to be. The other part of it is you already have a large recreation agency in the city of Racine serving the same amount of people, right? They have a foothold on a lot of the programs because they already had the built-in facilities and different things. So it's like, could we start a basketball program to compete with them if we put in a rec center here? But does that make sense? So I try to look at things like Pleasant Prairie, because of population size, land size, you know, the growth that they're doing. They've invested a significant amount in, and I feel like we're just kind of getting started with that. You know, campus was a first step there, but they put in the Recplex, they put in Lake Andrea, they did a lot of things there. From a programming standpoint, it comes down to, you know, staff, right? You know, there's myself and a part-time staff member trying to execute a number of these different programs. So you're kind of hamstrung on trying to get us to a point where we feel good to then expand. But I think we'll get there, you know. So I don't know if I really answer that. Is that kind of what you're looking at? We have the land space, you know, is comparable for sure. You know, I don't think when you look at the number of acres that we have, but different programming, some are run through school districts, some are different. So it's such a strange entity, you know, like Waterford is run through their school district. You have Milwaukee Park and Recreation, which is run by the school district, but then you've got Milwaukee County Parks who run stuff. And so it's kind of odd.
It sounds like for the amount of staff you have, which is just a handful, seems like you're doing an awful lot of things with a small staff.
Trying, yeah. Like I said, I think from the day that I was hired, it is getting us to this certain benchmark while continuously trying to add things as well. So that's why, you know, we started this year with the park, which I should mention, the park planning for the 4 neighborhood parks, Drozd, Dirksey, Pheasant Creek, and James Turek. You know, we've got the open houses coming up on the 7th and the 9th for those. That's my plug. But that's roughly 1/3 of the parks. So then when you factor, so if we have master plans for all 4 of those, we have campus, which has been developed. Smolinski is pretty good right now, Super Pride as well. We're already catching up, and that's where we're at. So we have to get a plan down the road of like 15 years from now, we're recycling for new equipment, new amenities, different things to make sure that these parks stay relevant. Not to mention all the housing development and different things that are coming up where I think we just talked about at the last meeting that they were dedicating parkland as part of theirs or different other ones that are proposed on the park and open space plan, planning for the future of those. So, yeah.
George, at the campus park, is a cricket pad in operation, and if so,
It should be this spring.
did anyone play?
No, so that, if you look at the revenue that we brought in, we actually missed our mark from our projected budget because we did not have the opportunity to rent those out this past summer. So, they looked in really great shape here in September and October, so I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be able to have them full operation, this upcoming summer.
Okay, and there were some residents who had expressed interest or asked that either we add more pickleball courts or we add the lights at the night, so what's the status of that?
So we did not submit anything for 25, but we do have some money set aside for professional services of just kind of outlining what that would look like for additional areas. One would be pathway lights and lights for pickleball, but there is nothing imminent for 25.
Thank you. I forgot what we had put in the budget, so.
Well, and I think as we have the study for the 4 new parks, it's a matter of, do you expand the pickleball courts at Campus Park, or do you spread them out?
Yeah,
And add them to some of the other areas of town that make them more regionally located?
Yeah, so that's,
Thought to that?
yeah, and that's we should be able to do some things at the same time, right? So they're depending on cost, some parks may take minimal amount of improvements based on the size, I'll use Dirksey as an example. It's, less than an acre, needs a playground update and maybe a couple other amenities. So when you're looking at the cost for the year, depending on what the other requests are for the village, could we tandem in some sort of, amenity change at Smolinski, at campus, that's why we called it phase 2, right? How many phases do we want to go through? And we did a lot the first time in phase 2 because it made more sense from a construction standpoint. We left it in a place where to come in and add those amenities won't disturb too much at the park. So it's an evaluation and seeing what's the need, right? And that's the nice thing. We'll be doing our park and open space plan update again too. And who knows where, if they end up putting pickleball courts at Crawford, so then we've got 6 at campus, 4 at Pritchard, 2 at Village Green, 4, I think it was in their plan, 4 to 6 would be at Crawford, plus your indoor. Is it the need or is it just a want also? What is the need? These 4 neighborhood parks, I believe that was a need, which is why I pushed so hard for it to get the master plan. But it's just my opinion, right?
Well, it's interesting. It's always, an evaluation, so.
Yeah. But out of all the parks, my experience is and what I get feedback from the resident, the campus park has been super hit
Absolutely.
with the
The concert
splash
series
pond and the
was
concerts
a
and
lot
the
of fun.
pickleball. It is a super hit.
Yeah,
The community loves it.
Yeah, I'm very proud of it, so.
I think the only, not a big deal, but a negative comment I have heard from a couple of kids is, the playground. Some other playgrounds have the ground is like tires,
Mhm.
and here we have bark.
Yep.
And because of bark, some kids, when they walk it, it's kind of ouch.
oh,
Yeah, so maybe.
So it is a different type, I mean,
Yeah,
to be fair, it's engineered wood
But
fiber.
you can imagine because the
and-
kids play without the shoes,
Mhm.
and it's easy for them to run on the tired,
rubber tread. Some
rubber
kind of a
tread,
rubber-
rubber tread.
rubber,
I'm using.
yeah.
I couldn't get it. Yeah, rubber tread. Then on the bar, because they're not wearing shoes, and they like to run.
Yeah, it's
not a big
so
deal,
yeah, right, and that's the thing, is when you're looking at the
future,
cost of the park,
Nancy has more money.
I believe that one was 68,000 to put in. If you went with a port in place at that time, we were probably looking
No,
at
again,
twice as much.
At that time happened,
So,
but I'm just saying is that
Yeah.
kids saying, "Oh, that hurts." So
Well, kids are kids, we keep, is it a need or a want, George, right?
yeah, that's true.
They should just put on their shoes for a while, that's all.
Yeah, the construction managers and architects call that value engineering, right? I
Yep.
mean, that's, if you wanna, if we put in a second basketball court, but, you're gonna have to pull from somewhere else if you got a limited amount of money, so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again,
But no, yeah, that is, I mean, yeah, the port in place and then other surfaces, they're great.
All right.
Your village
Thank you,
president.
George.
Thank you.
Commissioners,
All right,
one more thing to take care of.
Move to adjourn.
and before we do second that, I would like to just say happy holidays to our committee members and staff. Everybody's worked hard this year. It's been a lot going on. We all deserve a nice, safe holiday. Enjoy your families and good food and good presents, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas, Happy
Yes.
Holidays all, and like Mr. Van Becken made a comment to George, you guys are doing a lot with the staff you have, so thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Enjoy this break with your, with the family and the friends. This is the time.
For a second,
Second.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Last meeting of the year.